I think they're buzzwords that are being thrown around, but anybody who I know who has either a multi-million-dollar net worth or a billion-dollar net worth, they don't look at money as something that they can do for themselves. They look at it as a vehicle to make an impact.
Hello Sales Nation, I'm Will Barron, host of the Salesman Podcast, and welcome to today's show. On today's show we have Geoff Woods, who is, or was, a salesperson. I guess let's start there. He was a medical device salesperson, much like myself, who moved into the world of entrepreneurship and now runs a six-figure business through leveraging mentors. He has a billionaire as a mentor, and we're diving into the success secrets that billionaire shared with Geoff. You can find out more about Geoff over at geoffwoods.com. We link to a podcast that he did run, and now he's given up the hot seat to someone else. It's pretty epic, his story, and you can find out more about that in the show notes over at salesman.red. And with that all said, let's jump in to today's episode. Hey, Geoff, and welcome back to the Salesman Podcast.
Mr. Will Barron, thanks for having me.
You're more than welcome. And today we're going to dive into the world of billionaires and the success secrets that you personally have gleaned from them. But I want to add a little bit of context before we get into the real juicy stuff, perhaps in the middle of the show. And I want to start by asking you, because this could be a whole show in itself, perhaps. But how did you put yourself in a position where you could be gleaning these success secrets from a billionaire?
I detached myself from the outcome. Here's what I mean by that. It's so easy to say, I want to have a net worth of $1 million, or I want to suddenly be best friends with billionaires. But you're attaching yourself to the outcome. I instead focused on a simple principle. Every single interaction that I have with a human being, period, I want to find a way to add value to them. What ended up happening, and I learned this from seeing other people who were extraordinarily successful, that's how they operated. So it wasn't like I woke up and said, I'm going to be this type of person. I saw it being done by people who were where I wanted to be, and I embodied it. What ended up happening as a result is I became a person that other people wanted to be in relationship with. I became a person that other people felt good about, and as a result, they then wanted to connect me with their friends. They wanted to help me. And as you start hanging around with successful people, they know people who are a little bit further ahead than them. And those people know people who are a little bit further ahead than them. And what ended up happening is I ended up developing relationships up the chain to the point where I now have been mentored directly by a few billionaires.
So I could dive into this so deep. I'm going to hold back because that's a show in itself. And I want to add a little bit more context to the world of a billionaire, perhaps, and to make it real as well for the audience, rather than, because this word billionaire can mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. First question, massively subjective. Are billionaires normal people?
Yes and no. Yes, in the sense that of the ones that I am aware are billionaires, I would have never known. I would have never known unless somebody had told me that guy's a billionaire. The way that they dressed, the way that they spoke, I would have never known. In that regard, they are like normal people. How they are not like normal people is the way they think.
So you're saying that, let me just stop here before you go on the think side of things, because I want to ask a leaded question in the fact that we go on Instagram, we see all these pictures of massive yachts, of Rolex, literally in a Bugatti with 5 Rolexes up the guy's arm. Is that what a billionaire's life is like? Or no. Is that just a massive charade and probably designed to sell you some kind of product at the end of it?
Of the ones that I know, they are not like that. One of them said directly to me, it's not what you make, it's what you keep. And oftentimes I look at the people who are living that type of a life where they own a private jet and they drive the fancy car and all those things. If you actually looked at their net worth, which is the scorecard that the rich keep, it may not be that good. But what does it take to have a true $1 billion net worth? Those people, they don't buy liabilities. They aren't buying all the flashy stuff. They buy assets. It's very, very different.
So is that inadvertently the first success secret, perhaps, then, that we should be buying assets as opposed to making it look like we are rich?
Well, if your goal is to increase your net worth, then yes.
And shouldn't that be everyone's goal, though? Shouldn't, because there's a safety net being drawn into that. There's a whole load of things being drawn into it that are perhaps not the most flashy objectives, but they're the ones that are in 20 years' time going to put you in the best position, surely.
Possibly, because you can have a high net worth and be in financial trouble if your net worth is tied up in assets that do not produce cash flow. And that's one of the things where recently I've been talking about, hey, I've got some funds that I want to make an investment with. What do I do? Do I go and I buy single family home? Like, that's great for net worth building, but on a monthly cash on cash from a cash flow standpoint, actually not that great. And like we talked about in the last episode, I was in a position where my income was slashed by 40%. And suddenly I was hurting really badly. And even though my net worth was at I'll say a good range for my age, cash flow wise, I was cash poor and I had to endure some tough times. So it depends.
And leading on from that, and we'll come back to how billionaires think in a second, but should we be, again, from the Instagram world that we all live in, and perhaps we shouldn't be living in it, should we be striving to be billionaires? That's the cool phrase. Should we be striving to be millionaires? Does it really matter in the grand scheme of things? And are these just buzzwords that are being thrown around?
I think they're buzzwords that are being thrown around, but anybody who I know who has either a multi-million-dollar net worth or a billion-dollar net worth, they don't look at money as something that they can do for themselves. They look at it as a vehicle to make an impact. And I think that's an interesting to hold on to. Whether you have a lot of money or a little money, I think money just magnifies who you are as a human being. If you are a really, truly solid human being, like one of the guys I'm in a relationship with, the fact that he has that type of a net worth, when there was like recently a catastrophic flood in West Virginia, he was able to cut a $500,000 check and give it directly to the people who could go and distribute it to the people who mattered most. And that way he was able to actually have influence and impact in the situation. So I think looking to accumulate money for money's sake, ultimately you're going to get to a point where you have enough and you're no longer inspired or moved by it. It's now, what type of an impact can you make with it?
If you need to give massive value to lots of people to become a billionaire, does that automatically make it so that you 100% have to be a relatively good value-giving guy? Or can you still make it to that level of being a billionaire by being a quote-unquote just not nice person?
I don't know. I'm sure there are people who are not nice people who have gotten to that level through different tactics. I mean, I immediately think of Wall Street. But at the end of the day, if you want to make more money, you have to produce more value. So I'm sure there is your fair share of good people and crappy people who have that type of net worth.
And where I'm leading with all of this is, if it's perhaps not what we should all be aiming for, if the Instagram world is a bit weird and twisted and, well, fake and wrong, are billionaires happy? Does all this money, and I can guess where you're going to go with this, but does all that money secure you a genuine happy existence? Or is that another fallacy that a lot of people listen to the show want to become millionaires, multimillionaires because they think it's going to give them happiness? Is that a false construct in itself?
I don't think that money directly leads to happiness. At a certain point, they did a study on this. It's roughly $72,000 is where, quote unquote, all your needs are met from a happiness standpoint. And there is an aggressive diminishing rate of return after that point for every additional dollar you make. Money can buy you happiness in the sense of if you leverage it as a vehicle to do good. You leverage it as a vehicle to do the things that would then provide you happiness.
Nice. So you brought up this concept of vehicle a number of times now. In the world of success secrets, and let's get into a couple of these. Is that the thing that we should be aiming for? It's not to have a B2B professional sales job. It's to you shouldn't even think of it as a job, perhaps. You should think of it as a vehicle to wealth. Is that a better way of looking at things? And is that how a billionaire 50 years ago or 20 years ago, or whatever, would look at it?
Possibly. Coming from a sales background myself, I looked at my medical sales career as a vehicle to produce enough free cash flow for me to then go and acquire real estate, for me to then go and possibly invest in businesses. So I knew that I was not going to be a salesman for my entire life. So therefore, I was loving my stepping stone. I was loving everything that provided me because it allowed me to get to where I am now. And now that I'm where I am now, I'm like, okay, what are the next vehicles that I can invest to get to that next level?
And is that the game? Is that the game that everyone listening now should be playing, in that you become a billionaire or a millionaire or whatever your goal is by investing, not necessarily by increasing your single stream of initial income?
I haven't done the research on it, but I think if you looked at, I know from a millionaire standpoint, it comes from business ownership and investments. It's like 99% of the world's millionaires, they are either business owners or they own investments. When you start getting to the billionaire status, I've got to assume there's a company there that's driving it, because investment strategy alone, I don't think it goes fast enough.
Why not? Is that just literally it's a safer bet, but there's slower gains on it over time?
Not necessarily, but if you can invest $100,000 and start a business that suddenly, scales and produces a crazy amount of cash flow, and you have enough equity and you're getting that much, now you have a cash flowing business that allows you to then have the capital to go and invest, versus working your W-2 job, saving 10%, and then having money to buy.
Yeah. So to the salespeople listening now, Geoff, what should they be doing with their sales job? Because it seems like a bunch of angles for this. There is the one over in the US, I think it's called a 401k,
Yep.
your retirement, your fund. It might have been 20 years ago, perhaps the best option. It doesn't seem, and I'm not a huge expert in this, but it doesn't seem right now that it's the best pathway or vehicle to grow wealth, to retire. And surely you want to be able to semi-retire. You want to be relatively financially independent at the youngest age possible, so you can still have as much fun and go skiing and do whatever stupid stuff you want while you've still got the energy and the legs to do it. So it seems like one option, and that might have been the option that our parents perhaps would have been motivated to go down. There is the what we just described then, which is what you've done very successfully, and it's what I'm moving towards doing in the next 12, 18 months or so, which is having, whether it be B2B sales job or whatever it is, and then investing in real estate and things of that nature. And then the third option, which is the trendy on thing to do at the moment, which is what I literally did. And I know other salespeople, and I get asked about this all the time from the audience. I get emails every day about this. Hey, entrepreneurship seems really cool. I could definitely quit my job and start a business because I can sell anything. And I'm going to sell my company to Microsoft in 5 years' time and make 20 million and then live off that. Out of those three options, for the most of the salespeople listening, is there a best way to go about this? Or no, let me put this a different way. Is there a higher percentage chance of success through one of those three options?
It's going to be unique for every single person. I can tell you that the latter option of burning the ships and just jumping, that is not me. I've got a wife, I've got kids, I've got a mortgage. There's no freaking way. And when you want to grow a business, one of the worst things you can do is put yourself in the position where you have to be taking money from the business to cover your lifestyle, because then you're going to make short-sighted decisions. You're not going to be investing for the long run. That's not the play I would do. I go back to, if you are a salesperson, you are in control of your income. I am looking and saying, what's the one thing that I can do to double my commissions this year, and take that additional amount, and whether you're starting a side business with it like I did, or whether you're investing that into real estate, or you're investing it into stocks, or whether if you make enough money and you're considered a accredited investor, you actually start investing in companies. That's to you. What's the flavor of your money? I can't guide you there. But at the end of the day, what I will tell you is I was kicking ass in sales. I had a lot of money to play with, and that's exactly what I did. I started playing. I started getting into real estate, not having any education or knowing what I didn't know, and I ended up losing a lot of money. So leverage your God-given skill as a salesperson to communicate, influence, and form relationships with people, and start forming relationships with the people who are successful at what you want to be doing, and ask them what they would do.
So if you went to your billionaire mentor and put it into, we'll talk about context for the salesperson now, and then we can perhaps get a bit crazy and talk about what we both will be doing in 10 years' time. That'll be an exciting conversation to perhaps wrap up the show with. But if you went to your billionaire mentor and you were this successful B2B medical device salesperson, what do you think would be the biggest bang for buck piece of advice they'd give you towards perhaps the end goal of not becoming a millionaire, but the end goal of early retirement or becoming financially independent?
They would say, if you really want to live a big life, you need to build a big business that will fund that big life. And this is one of the most profound things that had ever been shared with me. The reason top talent leaves a job is because they can't have everything they could possibly ever want in life inside your world. So they leave because there's another place that they perceive that they can have more. And so it's now a matter of, if you want to achieve an extraordinary amount of success in your life, you recognize no one succeeds alone. You're going to have other people. So it's now about, how can you give yourself permission to allow your life to get so big that someone else can step into your world and have everything they could possibly ever want inside your world. Let me give you an example. I'm in medical device sales. I launch a podcast called The Mentee, January 13th of 2015. I start to scale the podcast. The podcast is now, there's a six-figure business behind it. In the process, I also end up having the opportunity to partner up with Gary Keller, who started Keller Williams, the real estate company, and his partner, Jay Papasan. They co-authored The One Thing together to be their CEO for their new media company. I'm starting a company based on focus and one thing, yet I have two things: my podcast business and the one thing business. I'm divided. So what a normal person would do is they'd say, oh, the one thing's the bigger opportunity, just shut the podcast down. This is where that mentorship has come into play. How can I allow my world to get so big that somebody else can step into the role of being the next mentee and take over that business and have everything that they could possibly want inside my world? And that's what's happening. Literally, this week I announced on my show that I'm going to be stepping away from the mic and recruiting the next mentee, that it's time for them to document their journey, for me to step into the role of being the mentor, for me to open up my Rolodex to them with the whole goal of accelerating their transition of wherever they want to go. And they will run that business. Now I'm starting to think like what this particular billionaire mentor thinks like. How can I identify a model? How can I build a system around it? And then how can I step out of the way so that somebody else can step in and have everything they could possibly ever want running that system?
To becoming a billionaire, which is more important? The mindset, the ability to face risk, the ability to not be bothered by rejection and things like this nature, and the ability to think big and not have these walls up around you and not be, bothered by what society tells you should happen, or the skill and the ability to put systems into place? Which is, if you had to choose one, gun to head, Geoff, which one?
Mindset, no question. Not even a hard one. I know when Gary and Jay were vetting me, I know what they were looking for. And the number one thing they were looking for was vision. Can I cast a big vision? But then they were also looking to see, can he think big, but can he start by acting small? And this is where the power of focus comes into play. As entrepreneurs, as salespeople, we have this shiny object syndrome. Something excites us and boom, we go. And then while we're on our way, we're making progress toward that goal. Something else shiny happens and boom, we course correct. And you end up not taking any territory because you're constantly shifting priority. There's opportunities everywhere. The most successful people I know say yes to almost everything, or say no to almost everything, so that they can say yes to their one thing. The one thing that they can do, such that by doing it will make everything else easier or unnecessary. It's just like knocking down that lead domino, and just by one gentle little tick, setting off this cascade of all these other dominoes running down.
Okay, this leads me then to the mindset and the vision side of things. How do we go about increasing our vision of what we perhaps are even personally capable of versus, what a business or what the sales role, what everything else is capable of? And leading on from that, what holds us back from this as well?
I'll share with you what's worked for me. I'm sure there are multiple ways you can do it, but I only want to speak from experience. My very first meeting, sitting down with a guy like Gary Keller, I walk in and I cast my vision for the company. And I'm talking about how we're going to create books for all these other authors, and we're going to help them implement monetization systems on the back end, blah, 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 blah. And he stops me and he says, that's great, but you're not thinking big enough. What's the type of business you could put into place that could legitimately threaten to put Amazon out of business? And that stopped me dead in my tracks. I'm going, what? Like, the fact that I had surrounded myself with someone who played on such a bigger scale instantly expanded my mind. So if you are wanting to expand your vision, hang around people who have big visions, because they're going to look at you and the situation that you're in and your perception, which is incredibly limited, and they're going to immediately open it up. And the more that you surround yourself with people who are further ahead than you, the more your vision will open up.
And I will speak on behalf of probably 99% of the audience now who say, when they heard that, then they go, well, you're never going to be as big as Amazon. Is that literally the limited mindset that you have until you start hanging out with these people? Because when you said that struck me, and obviously it struck you in the moment as well. Did he genuinely think that part of the business could be and rival Amazon, or was he playing more a thought exercise of what if as opposed to the reality?
I don't know. Knowing that he went from being this tiny little real estate company in Austin, Texas, to being the largest real estate company in the world, I'm sure there's an element of it that's serious. But I think there's also part of it that just says, think big, dude. Think frickin' big. And now that you cast this big vision, how do you start small? What's the one thing you need to be focusing on right now? And you just do that, and you say no to everything else. And this power of focus is freaking hard. Maybe a month ago, I brought in my new business plan, and there were 3 points on it. That's it. 1, 2, 3. 3 priorities. We started talking about number 1. He asked some questions. I said, we good? He said, yep. We went to number 2. And halfway through number 2, he stops me and he starts asking questions about number 1. And I answer him. I go, we good? He goes, yeah. Okay. I go back to 2. I finish 2 and I start getting into number 3. And then he stops me again and goes back to number 1. And I satisfy his questions there and I say, are we good? He goes, yeah. And I start talking about number 3 and he stops me again and he goes, quick question. You're saying that this is your number 1 priority, right? I say, yes. He goes, do you need to do number 2 to accomplish number 1? I said, no. He said, do you need to accomplish number 3 to accomplish number 1? I said, no. He said, then do me a favor, cross number 2 and 3 out and don't talk to me about them again until you accomplish number 1. It's really easy to cast this big vision of all the things that you should be doing, but to have the discipline to narrow the focus back to the point where you can say, what is the one thing that I need to be doing right now? And to say no to everything else. Simple in concept, seldomly done. That is what gets you to the top.
So they could be looking at prospecting, and the prospecting could be the one thing that would help them then with cash flow, with then commissions, with then being able to invest going further down the future.
Sure.
But that could be taken in multiple directions of it. We could be focusing on the one thing, right now as the wrapping up listening to this show, what's the one thing they could be doing in this moment to increase the number of prospects they bring in, or they could be focusing on what's the biggest leverage point to have more prospects in a year's time. What kind of time frame should we be looking at for all of this?
Well, first and foremost, you're assuming that your one thing has to do with business. In the book, Gary talks about there's 7 circles of your life: your spiritual life, your personal life, your relationships, your business, your job. Like, there's all these different areas of your life. It's a matter of saying, of all the areas, what's the area I want to focus on? For the context of this show, let's say it is your business. Let's say it is your sales business. What's the one thing you can do for your business such that by doing it, everything else will be easier or necessary? You're likely right that it's prospecting, but now it's a matter of really narrowing it down to the specific measurable activity. What's the one thing I can do for my prospecting? Maybe it's making an hour of phone calls, and maybe you boil it down even more. Maybe it's spending 15 minutes to identify the specific calls you're going to make. Like, you need to get it down to such a granular level that you identify what your one specific measurable activity is, and then do what we call time blocking, which is actually having time on your calendar that you do not violate because it is your most important activity to do that thing.
And where I want to get out with this as well, though, is that's something that you can do in a day. How far do you project these things forward? Because clearly,
until it's a habit. until it's a habit.
I appreciate that. Where I'm going with this, though, is that at some point you will have enough funds to then your one thing should be perhaps something different. Do you just ad hoc change when the moment's right?
It depends on you. If your one thing is really your one thing, then your one thing, you had a specific goal in mind that you wanted to accomplish with your business, at which point you get to have an honest chat with yourself and say, is this still my one thing? Or has my focus shifted? You know, I've shifted from lead gen to now recruiting, because now we've got the revenue going and now I need to bring the team in. Like, my one thing has shifted. It's going to depend on you. Nice.
Okay, cool. And just before we wrap up this part of the show, moving into some questions that I ask everyone that comes on, is there anything that we've missed? Clearly, there's loads that we've missed. Is there anything that we've missed that is a huge, would give a huge ROI for the audience, consider that they're sales professionals, advice-wise from a billionaire?
One of the things that I have noticed from the most successful people that I have run with is really two things. The value exchange. They show up every single day, every single conversation, every single deal, making sure that they are giving more than they are taking, because it's like a bank account. You cannot take money out of the bank account unless you first put enough money in, and you always have to make sure that you have a positive balance. Relationships are the same way, and relationships is the number one investment that you should be making. That's straight from Gary Keller. It is the most undervalued and the highest return investment that you could make is it is the investment in people.
Why is it undervalued? Because salespeople do massively undervalue this as well. They want to go in, they want to close the deal, they want to get out and get home as fast as possible.
Correct. I just don't. It's not taught in school. Nobody's ever told you this before. I mean, there's a million reasons why you don't see the hard ROI right then and there. But the reality is, if you have relationships, true relationships with people, you can have everything you could possibly want in this world. Any opportunity, it's yours. The ability to bring in talent and hire them and bring them in under you, it's yours. It just is. So that's one side. And the other is just, I cannot emphasize enough the power of focus. One of my other friends who has achieved that level of a net worth talked about the idea of an Olympic gymnast. He goes, an Olympic gymnast doesn't go home and watch Game of Thrones for an hour and then go, play on the computer and then go outside and shoot some hoops and then play some soccer and then chat with her boyfriend and then stretch for gymnastics. She wakes up, she eats, she sleeps, she breathes gymnastics, and she does nothing else until she wins a gold medal in that one thing. So for you, what's the one thing that you want to win a gold medal at first? What's the thing you want to truly be world class at? And make a commitment to yourself. Plant that flag in the ground and go on your road to mastery. And once you've achieved it, then you get to shift.
Nice. And one follow-up question to that, and then we'll go through these questions, because I think this is important as well, and I've been in this boat, you probably have as well before all the mentoring and everything else, and you might find yourself in there occasionally of, you go, yes, I've got my one thing. For me, when I first started doing this business with Salesman.red, it was, we're going to have a magazine that comes out weekly. It's going to kick the ass of all the other sales magazines out there that are a bit kind of dated and more towards management, and this is going to be more relevant for our millennial audience. And then, of course, a week later, I go, well, I might start a podcast as well. That could fit quite nicely, and they both promote each other. And then you go, well, all the text we're producing will work quite well on a blog. So then you start shifting all these, your focus. Are people, do billionaires and Olympic athletes, and we've had Olympic athletes come on the show before as well, to talk about this. Do they just have different DNA that allows them to commit to that one thing, to dive all the way deep into it, and to just stay with it, and they have that grit and that hustle? Or is it a learnt skill, the ability to do that?
What I will say is that to get to that level, you have to be an empire builder. And here's what I mean by that. You have to have an unwavering desire to win. This is something that salespeople just have in their genes, at least the true salespeople. There is an unwavering desire to be number one. That's why we want to see stack rankings consistently. That's why you care about getting on stage. It's not because, you don't even think about the money. Yeah, it's great, but it's like you want that freaking trophy. You want that recognition. You want to be able to say, I'm number one. But outside of that, it's an aggressiveness. It's the fact that when adversity shows up, you punch it in the face. That when you encounter a brick wall, you don't think, oh no, you try to run freaking through it. And I think we all have that as salespeople. That's why it's probably one of the greatest skill sets to ever master if you want to make it professionally in this world, if you want to achieve an extraordinary level of success.
I love it. I'm glad you said that. Some guests have come on and said that no, it's in your genes, it's in your DNA. Other people have said it's a learnable skill. I feel that, and I don't feel, I pretty much know this from the science makes sense that if you are alive right now, you have to have had, generations and hundreds of years and thousands of years of your ancestors have fought on battlefields. They've survived plagues. They've survived no food. It's very unlikely that you're coming from the rains and you've got the kind of grandparents, great grandparents that are have always had wealth and that have survived through just keeping hold of that, because clearly that diminishes over time in most cases. So I think everyone has that DNA and that grit built into them. So I'm glad you said that, and that's empowering for the audience. And with that, Geoff, I've got some questions to ask everyone that comes on the show, keeping with the billionaire theme. This first one will give a good insight, I'm sure. And these are quick fire questions. If you feel like you need to go deeper into them, just go deeper into them. First one: which would you have first, a yacht or a private jet?
Me personally?
Yep.
Private jet, but I don't think I'll ever have either.
Why private jet?
I'm not a water guy. I'd rather be able to, I'd rather pick up, be like, honey, let's go to Italy tomorrow. Honey, let's go to Vegas. I just, I'd rather have a jet.
Nice. I thought you were going to give some really insightful kind of, a jet can be used to go and network and meet with people, not waste time, whereas a boat's just a toy. But no, I appreciate that. Okay, next one. Dollar size if possible. What is the biggest deal you've ever closed?
Biggest deal I have ever closed, gosh, going back to my medical career, probably about 280,000.
Nice. Okay, next one. What is one book or resource, other than the one thing, that you would recommend to the Salesman Podcast audience?
Cash Flow Quadrant. Most people know Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad, Poor Dad. I think Cash Flow Quadrant is his greatest book because he breaks down the 4 quadrants that you can receive money from, either as an employee, as a solopreneur or solo business owner, as a business owner, or as an investor. And he talks about why you want to be on the business owner / investor side. Just changed the way that I viewed how my money was coming in.
Mm-hmm. Good stuff. We'll link to that in the show notes over at salesman.red. And next one, what does the first 60 minutes of your day look like?
In an ideal world or currently?
Currently, let's get real about it.
It shifts. There are times when I'm hyper focused, like I get up, I immediately meditate for 10 minutes and I have gratitude practice. We also have a new baby. So right now, it's waking up, intentionally not looking at my phone. I intentionally do not check email, do not check text messages, because I know in that moment I go into a state of reaction, and I won't do anything about it, which means it's in the back of my head and it's distracting me. And so I will get ready and I'll try to have some type of quality time with my kids and my wife before I take off for work. And then I meditate for about 10 minutes in the parking lot before I go into the building.
Nice. And just to focus in on that for a split second, what does your meditation practice look like?
It shifts. Right now, I'm going through a training with, what's it freaking called? What is the name? No, why can't I find it? There it is, Headspace.
Yeah.
Because they have actual things every day. And then I also have access to a higher level course that was not cheap, but it's like brain retraining in terms of my beliefs around money, my beliefs around business. So sometimes it's Headspace and sometimes it's that.
Nice. Can highly recommend Headspace to the audience. And have you ever done, just to wrap up this part of the show as well, have you ever done any kind of, how to put it, like self-hypnosis around money and things like that, or, NLP being projected onto you or things like that to try and rewire your brain? So I find that kind of thing fascinating as well.
I have personally been hypnotized. It's never been with the idea of changing my beliefs around money. I wouldn't be surprised if there was some NLP in this one program that I'm going through, because it's really intense stuff.
Good stuff. Okay, and final one, and I know you've answered this question before, because it's the same question I ask everyone that comes on the show. So I'm going to twist it around slightly for you on episode number 2 of many more in the future. That is, Geoff, if you could speak to every single person in the audience one-on-one, but you could only offer them one piece of sales advice to help them become better at selling, what would that one piece of advice be?
I immediately think of the Zig Ziglar quote: you can have everything you could possibly want in life if you first help enough other people get what they want first. And I'm sure I paraphrased that and botched it a little bit, but the idea, and this is speaking from experience, it's really easy to look at the prospect and see the deal and think about your commission. The truly exceptional salespeople recognize that if they add enough value to that prospect or that potential client first, that it is going to come around in droves. And once you truly grasp it and make it a part of you and it clicks, you get it. And everything changes. But getting to that point where you're able to let go of yourself first, let go of your ego, that's the hard part.
Geoff, with that, mate, I know you've got some changes coming up with the Mentee podcast, but tell us a little bit about that, and then tell us where the audience can find out more about you personally as well.
Sure. So my podcast is called The Mentee. For a year and a half, I've been recording the private conversations with the mentors that many of them we talked about here today that have shaped me and molded me and helped me get from where I was, going from employed entrepreneur in 10 months. I'm now in the position where somebody else is going to step in and be the mentee, and I'll now be one of the mentors, and I'm going to be taking over as the face of the one thing. So I'll be relaunching that podcast. But if you go to menteepodcast.com or geoffwoods.com, Geoff with a G, Geoff, you can find me there.
Amazing stuff. We'll link to all that in the show notes of this episode over at salesman.red. And with that, Geoff, genuinely, mate, I said this before we started recording, you've got a really good way of putting points across really succinctly. I can learn a lot from that myself as I'm interviewing you. And with that, mate, I want to thank you for your time, your insights, of course, and I want to thank you for joining us on the Salesman podcast.
Thanks, Will. Pleasure to be here.
And there we have it. Geoff, thank you for coming on the show. I appreciate your time and your insights, mate. I want to thank you guys, Sales Nation, for listening and tuning in every day and obviously sharing the show, because we're growing so fast now that the only way that we could be growing this fast is if you guys are sharing the, perhaps particular episodes you enjoy with your colleagues. I appreciate that. And so, with all that said, I'll speak with you again on tomorrow's episode